essentially what you had prior to World War II was the idea that to keep the native native. Now, keeping the native native essentially meant that no white man would ever go up there anyways. It was too expensive to assimilate the Inuit. So while in the first two phases you had these campaigns to assimilate First Nations peoples, for the most part they left Inuit alone. The triage that basically managed the North was a combination of the RCMP, who were there to show the flag. Then you had the churches, who were responsible for health and welfare and saving souls. And then you had the Hudson Bay Company, which was basically the economic connection. So what you have after the end of World War II is the third phase of residential schools. And this is the period where policy is integration. The government takes on the opinion that keeping the native native didn't work. Inuit must be prepared to take their place in the new North. And that becomes the entire new catchphrase, the buzz phrase. And essentially what they did was between 1955 and 1963 was they got as high as 75–80% of the youth in the schools. So you go into a school where you're in a mass group of small kids. There's little to no emotional contact. Boys and girls are separated in the Catholic schools. They have separate hostels, separate sits, separate areas in church, so you're separated from your siblings. And on top of that, we have a regimented militaristic system. So you think in terms of the kids where they don't understand what's happening, it's a foreign culture to them. You get whacked on the knuckles with rulers for being bad. In some cases there were physical and verbal abuse where you had abusive teachers or priests or nuns that actually literally talked down to them. A lot of this abuse was brought back into the Inuit communities. For example, when you talk about the generational impacts, you talk to younger Inuit today, particularly the women, and you get a feel that a very high percentage of Inuit women today have been at some point in their lives victims of sexual abuse. And a lot of this is traced directly back to the residential schools. They're being taught sometimes directly, sometimes indirectly by the school system that their culture has no value. They're not wanting to eat their traditional diet. In many cases, they're embarrassed by it. They want to speak English, and they're coming home to a place where this new North that they were prepared for doesn't exist. It's not there. And then on top of that, they're bringing back all kinds of social problems with them. The disconnection from their families and not knowing how to cope and how to deal with the sexual and physical abuse. We have to keep in mind too, there was no counseling programs. It wasn't like when they got off the plane and were brought back home that there were counselors there to help them deal with post-traumatic stress syndrome or anything else like that. They were just brought home and that was essentially it. You're on your own.